or program you choose. Or field or program you choose. The next thing that is important to note in this very first stage of applying, which is where you are now, is selecting an actual program. When you start your application, you'll see that there is a link to what's called a list of eligible programs. It's a very, very long list, and it can seem like it's a lot of information. In order to pick your program, there are a few things that I would advise that you do. The first thing that I would advise is that you look at Ireland's development and cooperative priorities. These again can be found in the guidance note, which is why the guidance note is a very important document to start with. The guidance note, it sets out that the Ireland Fellowship Program is part of the larger goal, Ireland's larger global goals, cooperative goals, development goals. But then there are other hyperlinks to the specific work or specific plans that Ireland wishes to accomplish in a specific period of time. So for instance, when I was coming in 2023, 2024, the goals were sustainable development, climate change, rule of law, human rights, environmental protection, sustainable development. I think I've already said that. Those were the goals that they were seeking to achieve within that specific period. And so you want to align your program with those goals. It's unlikely that if you choose a program which is outside of those goals, you will be selected. But don't think of it as limiting, more think of it as what you're going to use when you eventually come to writing your essays about why your program is relevant and how you intend to achieve your goals and improve your country and society. So that's the first thing when you're selecting a program, is to look at Ireland's development and cooperative priorities. A link to these cooperative priorities is in the guidance note. I had a look at the guidance note for this year, and the key things that I could pick out from the guidance note about Ireland's development cooperative priorities are strong political partnerships, peace, respect for human rights development, rule of law, inclusive economic growth, trade, and investment. So when you're choosing your courses, these are some of the things that you can consider. This is not an exhaustive list, so please do have a look at the guidance note and Ireland's development and cooperative priorities. And use the words that they use in their priorities in your application. Words like collaborative, promote peace and security, economic growth. Make sure those are really repeated in your application essays, because that's what they're sort of looking for. They're looking to see whether you align with their aspirations. Also be able to show how your goals and your own intentions with the program align with those goals, align with Ireland's overall goal. Second thing that I would advise you to do when you are selecting a program is to think about your own personal career goals. It's easy to come up with a program from a list of programs and just decide I'm going to do a Master of Sciences in program X. It'll be a lot harder for you to justify your choice, which is something you will have to do twice, maybe 3 times during this application process. So you have to be very sure about why you want to study that specific course and how it's relevant to your personal career development. Also try to have very clear goals for yourself. Where do you see yourself in 5 years post completing that course? And how will that help your country? How will that help your society? Another thing that you want to think about when you're selecting your program is sustainable development goals. Like I mentioned in the beginning, this is going to be a recurring part of your application process. Sustainable development goals are at the very core of the Ireland Fellows Program and Ireland's development aspirations. So you need to know what are the SDGs, first of all, and what program do I want to study, and how does that program contribute to an SDG? For instance, I'm studying international human rights and public policy. Within that, there is promotion of rule of law, which I think speaks to SDG 16. Please don't quote me, I'm not sure. I just know it speaks to one of the SDGs about promoting the rule of law. There's another SDG on equality. So if my work is connected to promoting gender equality and gender mainstreaming, for instance, I now have two SDGs that I can connect my work to. But the SDGs are plenty. And so try to fit your program within at least two of the SDGs, because this is something that you'll be writing about at least two times in this application process. So the SDGs, know the SDGs, identify SDGs which align with your course selection. Another thing to think about is how your program is going to strengthen Ireland and Zambia ties. And this goes back to what I mentioned about Ireland's development agenda, which you need to look at. So how will what you're studying strengthen Ireland and Zambia ties? Will you create collaboration between the university that you study at and the university that you did your undergraduate degree at, because you feel like there's a course that they offer that could be beneficial? Will you create professional links between professionals in your field of study? If you're, say, an engineer and engineers back home, will you be building information bridges between Ireland and Zambia? If you are, again, if you're an engineer, will you be saying certain applications, or there are certain programs that would be beneficial to engineers back home, or there are certain projects back home that would benefit from engineering information that I have received or that I will receive when I study in Ireland? So these are the kind of things that you should be thinking about. The last thing on this stage of application process is ranking your universities. If you've joined us, I'm just going to say that we apologize that I can't share my slides. We're having a bit of a technical difficulty, so I'm going to keep repeating when I talk about steps and I talk about very important things so you don't miss them. Please bear with me. So far, we've talked about reading the guidance note, which is where you should start from. We've talked about selecting a program, and in selecting a program, I've mentioned looking at the Ireland Development Cooperative priorities, identifying what priority works with your program. I've spoken about your personal career goals. I've spoken about the directory of eligible programs. I have spoken about SDGs, how they are at the center of the application process and the center of the fellowship itself. I've spoken about strengthening Zambia and Ireland ties, which should come out in your essays, which we'll get to in a minute. And now we're talking about ranking your universities. So if you've done all of these steps and you've looked at the directory of eligible courses, so the directory is separated alphabetically by area of study. So you have arts, you have law, you have engineering, you have development studies and security. Look at all of those courses, all the individual courses. You can go a step further and you can look at the individual courses and what the course modules look like. What are the sort of electives and what are the core courses that you'll be taking? This becomes important when you're justifying your specific course selection. So there are many courses. There are many courses. I would highly advise that if you want to do, for instance, a Master of Science in engineering, or you want to do a Master of Arts in Gender Studies, when you identify what you want to do, choose 3 different universities that offer that course or a course similar to that. That will increase your chances of getting selected at the end when you're now doing your university application. Because if you pick all three choices at one school and the one school rejects your application, that's the end, basically, because the chances of them accepting you are for one of three if you haven't met their criteria is very, very, very slim. And this is where ranking your universities comes in. At this stage of the application, stage one, you're not only choosing your course, you're also choosing the university that you want to do your course at, and you're ranking them in your order of preference. So number one would be your first choice, number two is your second choice, number three is your third choice. You usually can only apply to your first and second choice, and then your third choice if you're not accepted to your first and second choice. So when you're ranking your universities, again, review the list of applicable programs. In the list, in the directory, at the very beginning, they will give you a list of the schools. They will also give you a map of Ireland so that you can see where the school that you want to go to is located. Many people want to go to school in sort of the capital, which is Dublin, because that's where it's modernized. It's the center for a lot of IT, especially IT related courses. A lot of international organizations have headquarters in Dublin. So a lot of people prefer Dublin, but you may find that the universities in Dublin don't offer your courses or a course that you're interested in. So you have to look at other universities. I wouldn't recommend basing your placement program on where or the location of the university, but you may want to keep that in mind. So when you've decided what program you want, consider what universities offer it. Like I said, diversify, at least have three different universities to increase your chances of getting picked at the very end of the program. When you're picking the school, look at the school's entry requirements. So in addition to having to meet the entry requirements for the fellowship, you eventually have to meet the entry requirements of whatever university you choose to enter. Some universities have very high requirements, like Trinity College Dublin, I think, which is one of the top 5 schools in the country. Their entry requirements are a 2-1. A 2-1 is a merit or very high credit. 2-2 is I think is a credit or lower. So some schools have much higher requirements than others. Other schools also will consider whether your experience can make up for the fact that you don't have, say, a merit or a distinction or a credit. So if you have 10 years of valid working experience, there are some schools that will discount the requirement for you to have a higher qualification as far as your grades. So look at the school itself and look at the requirements. All of this is in the directory. So when you select a program, it will show you what the entry requirements are. The 2-2-2-1 system is very different. If you studied in Zambia, you will most likely be familiar with credit, a merit, and distinction. They also have the form, if you've looked at it, also has a GPA, where you can just enter your GPA. When I was at UNZA, we didn't have GPAs. So when I was filling out my form, because I got a credit, I filled it in as 2-1. Whether a credit is 2-1 or it's 2-2 is neither here nor there. Just be confident. But also the 2-1, the 2-2, that's important. But your experience is also very important. So just look out for schools that discount your experience. I know that schools like Maynooth, which is near Dublin, they have a specific track where if they don't accept you based on, if you don't have a 2-1, if you don't have a high merit, they have a specific application process for you to follow if you have a certain number of years of experience. So just consider that even as you're picking your schools. The next thing that you should think about is when you're selecting your universities and when you're ranking them in your order of preference, is your career aspirations as well. So just to recap, when you're picking a university, look at the list of applicable programs, look at what program you want, narrow down the schools that you're interested in, look at their entry requirements because this is important in the application process. So now that you've done that, you've picked your schools, you've picked your programs, how do you actually fill out the form? The form for stage one is fairly straightforward. All you have to do is, enter your name, say how many years of experience, I think at some point. And then you have to write about 200, or is it 150 word short essays. There are only three where you're justifying your application, basically. The first one is where you're talking about your career aspirations. Here you talk about your past experience, right? I've been working for X number of years doing this, and I intend to do this. And how does the program that you've picked, or the programs that you've picked, align with what you intend to come back home and do? So if you've picked a public policy and development studies master's degree, how does that impact what you intend to do when you come back home? What skills will you develop? So here you'll be saying things like, if I undertake this public policy master's, I will develop the skills to be able to influence public policy through engaging stakeholders like parliamentarians and other policymakers. And in so doing, I will contribute to SDG number X, which talks about strong government institutions. That's how precise you have to be because you only have 150 words. If your sentence is around 20 words long, that's only about 7 sentences. So you have to be very, very precise when you answer the essay questions. The second part is how your program relates to the SDGs, to attaining the SDGs. Like I mentioned before, SDGs are a very big part of this application and the application process. At the very least, identify two programs. Even if it's a very roundabout way of referring to the SDG, refer to it. So identify at least two SDGs and talk about how your work will impact the advancement of said SDG. And the last part, if I'm not mistaken, talks about your contributions to links between Zambia and Ireland. And I've spoken about this, I think already. Are you going to build professional relationships, academic relationships? Remember the buzzwords from the Ireland's development priorities that you're going to bring into your application. This is the time when you use them. Words like collaborative, enhancing collaborative pathways, promoting peace and security, economic growth, inclusive economic growth, equality. Show that you understand, first of all, the intersectionality of issues, but also how whatever you're doing is bridging a link. Zambia and Ireland, or Zambia and a lot of other countries, already have fairly well-developed links. So if you can identify how you're going to improve those links, your application is going to be that much stronger. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not always very easy and very straightforward to say that I will, after doing my master's degree, I'll now create a very strong pathway between Zambia and Ireland. Try to make it as practical as possible. For instance, the academia example that I gave, one of the things that I said in my essay was that I was going to draw links between academics in Zambian academics in Ireland to develop the human rights scholarship and academia, and also develop our jurisprudence. Those are very, very specific things because I'm a lawyer, so I was leaning towards that. And my area was international human rights law and public policy. So again, I leaned into that. I very briefly talked about the work that I already did. Before starting my master's degree, I worked for an NGO and I did human rights work. So that's the direction that I was leaning towards, and that's what I was emphasizing even in my application. But remember, it's 150 words. So you don't have time to say, in 2005, I started working there's no time. Go straight to the point and use words that have been used in the question to sort of keep you in line with what the application is asking for. There's really no space to waffle in 150 words. And because with people from around the world, it's not just an African thing, it's people from South America, people from Southeast Asia, people from small island developing states. It's a very competitive scholarship. So if you can be direct and clear as possible, your chances of getting selected are much higher. Just briefly before I go on to stage 2, if you are not familiar with IELTS, IELTS is an international English language test. If you don't have an IELTS certificate, you may have to take an English proficiency test before being invited to the second stage of applications. And this English language test could be Duolingo. It's very easy, very straightforward. You usually do it online, and then the results are sent directly to the Ireland Fellows Program. You've done stage 1, you've written your essays, you've aligned your essays to SDGs, you've shown connections between your career goals and how you're going to enhance connections between Zambia and Ireland. You've done all of that in stage 1, and now you're at stage 2. You'll be invited to proceed to stage 2. In stage 2, I'm going to go briefly over it because I think the main focus should be stage 1, and then I'll end and open for questions. Stage 2, you'll basically be doing the same thing. The only difference is I think you have to do it in maybe 200 words. That's not much more. So just be very careful, be as specific as possible. You'll also have to justify your program choices. Stage 2 is the only time really that you can change your selection. So remember how I said you have to select your program and then you have to select your universities. And I advise that when you pick a program, pick 3 different universities to increase your chances and rank them, bearing in mind their criteria for selecting students. So bear in mind whether they're asking for a 2-1, which is a high merit, or a 2-2, which is like a credit, your own academic qualifications or your experience, and how that will tie in with your program. So when you're justifying your program, they will ask you, what is the program you have chosen? How is that relevant to your career goal? And do you qualify for that program? So you have to say, I have chosen a master's in gender studies because I have been working in gender mainstreaming. Maybe you work for the Ministry of, the Department of Gender. And that's why I've chosen this program. I meet the entry requirements. And here you have to be very, very specific. I meet the entry requirements because the university requires a minimum of 2-1, which I have because I graduated from the University of Zambia with a credit. And they also require requisite experience of this much. I have that requisite experience. And that's how you justify your program choice. Remember, you've made 3 program selections. So your first choice program has to be really strong reasons why you've gone with your first choice program. I chose my first choice program because Whereas other schools also had human rights courses, a lot of those courses were Eurocentric. So it was European centered, and the course modules were also very European centered. I wanted a more global outlook, and I also wanted something that has a combination of public policy, which is what I do a lot of. So in justifying why that was my first choice, I said that it's the only program that has a combination of human rights law and public policy, which is what I do and which is what I want to contribute to. And that's how you justify your programs. Again, you only have 200 words, so be very deliberate in how you answer the prompt, and be very strategic also. Like I said, 3 programs, 3 universities. They can be related programs, but just choose different universities to increase your chances. In stage 2, you will also do motivational statements. This time you'll do 5, and they will be 200 words. It'll be generally the same. I think the only things that will be different are you'll be required to give your key achievements and leadership roles, whether this is in the workplace or outside the workplace. You will also be asked to demonstrate how you've worked towards SDGs in your career so far. So again, SDGs will come back again and again in this application. So know the SDGs. And regardless of what field you work in, you have contributed to SDGs, to an SDG in some way. Look at the SDGs, look at what the goal is and what it intends to achieve. Align an SDG or 2, preferably 2, to what you've already done and say, I've been working in the Ministry of Justice. And in working in the Ministry of Justice, I have done this. Therefore, I have contributed to SDG number 16, which is about rule of law and strong institutions. And I've also contributed to SDG number X, which is about equality. That's how you marry your work with SDGs. And SDGs will come up again and again. And you need to bear that in mind when you're picking a program. Stage 2, you can't change. After you submit your stage 2 application, you can't change your ranking of universities. You can change them from stage 1. When you're at stage 2, you can say, oh, instead of this university being number 1, I want this university to be number 1. You can change them, but after stage 2, you can't change them anymore. So you need to be very sure about your choices. Just going to skip some of the things I intended to talk about so we can have some time for questions. Stage 3 is the interview. You will most likely be interviewed by people from the embassy, the Irish embassy. And the interview is very conversational. They will ask you what you know about Ireland. You want to do a bit of research before you go into the interview. You want to talk about what you know about it politically, economically, legally, whatever is relevant to your field. And just be as conversational as possible. It's not like a job interview. It's really very much a conversation. Do a bit of research as well on what Irish Aid is doing. So Irish Aid is really the institutional vehicle that the government of Ireland uses to do its collaborations with other countries, such as the Irish Fellowship Program. So look at what Irish Aid is doing. I made the mistake of going in without doing any research on Irish Aid, and that was the first question that they asked me, and I really had to waffle my way through that. So please learn from my mistake and read up on that before you go into your interview. After you've done your interview, you will, if you're successful, and I hope everyone is successful, you will be granted the scholarship and you'll be invited to apply to universities, to the 3 universities that you picked. You will first start with your first 2 options, and if you're not successful, which you won't be, you'll be very successful, you will then proceed to apply. At the university application stage, I won't really go into detail because the Irish Council of Students, the people that administer the fellowship, they will really help you through your university application stage. There will literally be a person assigned to you who will help you with each of your applications. And they will tell you all you need to know about the application process. So I really won't go into detail about that. And I think I'll stop there so that we can have some questions.
Thank you so much, Gombo. That was a good presentation, and I hope most of us have learned one or two things and have been inspired. This time we will get questions. If you want to just ask, you can unmute yourself, or you can just send in the chat, and then we'll be able to answer your questions. Thank you.
Chilombo, in your when you are starting, you had mentioned that the application of the scholarship by invitation and showing some institutions. Could you just clarify if only people that those else can apply?
Thank you, Salome. Yes, so initially, well, that's really been my understanding of how the fellowship has been administered over the past several years, is that the Irish Embassy will invite specific organizations and institutions to apply. Most of those are state institutions, so ministries and parastatals and things like that, but also NGOs. Unfortunately, this year I haven't seen that list. I don't know if it was published at all. I have reached out to the Irish Fellowship Program to see if they have clarification on whether they've invited specific institutions or organizations to apply. They haven't responded to me yet. And I would say just apply as long as you have 3 years of experience and you can align your career goals and aspirations with the Irish development goals and plans and the general goal of the fellowship, which is to promote sustainable development goals. Hope that answers your question, Salome. In short, everybody should apply.
Then we have a question in the chat. Rasta is wondering if this whole application process involves some application fee. Then
No, so there's
whether the certification is mandatory.
There are no fees for the entire application process. There are also no fees when you apply to the universities because the fellowship will absorb that fee. You don't need like a certification. The only thing that you need is for your qualifications to be certified by a commissioner of oath, but any commissioner can do that anywhere in Zambia. It just needs to be a commissioner to commission a copy of your qualifications. And this is only at stage 3 when you're at your interviews. They will ask you to come with certified copies of your documents. So the usual, your NRC, your passport, your degrees, other relevant certificates. You just have to have them certified by a commissioner for oaths.
Okay. And then there's this other question that most people usually ask me. If you have a number of courses that you have put on your list, is there specific maybe focus, or maybe which one should you give more weight when writing your motivation?
I think the one that you qualify most for, the one that you have the most experience for. If you have experience in all 3, I would go with the one that aligns most with your future goals. If all of them align most with your future goals, I would go with the one that you are likely to meet the entry requirements for. Because like I mentioned, I advise that you pick 3 different schools. So if it's 3 different programs that you're passionate about all of them, look at whether you qualify equally for all of them. Some of them might require that you have, say, a merit or a distinction, and you only have a credit. I wouldn't put that as, your priority. Bear in mind your own personal career goals. Because you will have to justify, how that aligns with your goals and what you intend to do when you come back. So those are the things that I would ask myself if I had 3 very strong options and I wasn't sure which one to pick.
Thanks. Zingani, was that a hand?
Uh, uh, Hi. Sorry about that. Thanks very much, Romo, for that presentation. I've typed my question in the chat, but just wanted to find out whether I heard talk about merits, credits, and all those kinds of things. Whether a merit in Zambia would be the same as a merit in Ireland. Thanks.
Zingani, so they have a different system. The system is more aligned to the British system. They don't really have merits and credits. So what they have is what they call a 2-2-2-1 system. So full colon 2 is like say a low credit, and then a 2 full colon 1 is in an upper credit or a merit. And then first class honors would be a distinction. That's sort of that's sort of the rating. So there's no merit or credit. It's just 2-2, which is like on the lower scale of a credit, or like if you don't have either a credit or a merit, and then a 2-1 if you have a merit or a high credit, and a 1 or first class honors if you have a distinction. So I have a credit from the University of Zambia. I put that down as a 2-1. I wasn't queried. And also I didn't have a GPA. At the time, Unza didn't have GPAs. So I didn't even know on the GPA scale where my GPA would fall. So I put it down as a 2-1 and I got a credit and I was successful. So if you did get a credit, you will be fine. But also remember that not your qualification, sorry, your experience is equally important. If you can show that you have a lot of experience in this field, a lot of the schools will actually select you because you have that experience. And sometimes they reject applications from applicants who may have a very good, maybe you graduate with a distinction, but you don't have the requisite experience. For the fellowship, the requisite experience is 3 years of full-time employment. Internship will be considered as employment, but on a different scale. So if you intern for 1 year, that will be considered 6 months. That's how you sort of balance that distinction, merit 2-1, and your experience. I hope that answers your questions again.
Someone else has a question, feel free to ask before we conclude our meeting.
I'm just going to type, sorry, Victor, I'm just going to type my email in the chat in case you have questions as you proceed with your application or as you proceed in the application process. I'm very responsive on email. So please do email me if you have any questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have something.
What's the time period when the application process is open? In case for those that haven't started applying for this year, so they can be on the lookout on which months do the application process is open? For how long?
Application usually opens around June or July. So you wouldn't be applying, and then the academic year begins in September. So when you start your application now, you're not going to come in September, you're going to come next September, which sounds like a long time, but it's really not. So the application process opened 2 weeks ago. It's closing on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. And this is honestly, it's a lot of time to be able to complete the application. Like I said, the stage 1 form is very short. There are only 3 essays, and those 3 essays are only 150 words. So you can definitely get that done between today and Sunday. So if you wanted to wait, you will be waiting until next year, and you'll be waiting until next year, June or July, to start the process, and then you would be thinking about 2026, 2027 intake. So if you haven't started the application process, I highly advise that you start it now.
Thank you.
I've seen this question about the advertised institutions that have been invited. I have searched online for a list of whether they have released a list of institutions that have been invited. In previous years, there has been just, an open list of institutions that have been invited. I haven't been able to find it this year. So I would really suggest that you apply. I've emailed to ask for clarification